I was always in awe of the book, really, which is not necessarily a good thing to be when you're trying to adapt a book. I think the book is a kind of modern masterpiece, really. I think it is like Ulysses or something like that. Wasn't experienced enough to think, oh, that'll make a good film. Just felt greedily, selfishly, this is phenomenal. Could we make this as a film? Because, you know, I suppose if you were a painter, you'd think, could you paint this? You know, it's inspiration you're always looking for. You know, something just gets you by the balls, really, and won't let you go. And the book's like that. A lot of the locations that we went round location hunting, you'd often spot a copy of the book in a corner. It really meant something to people even then. The problem with the book is there's so much in it, it's what you leave out, and I think John did a great job like that, because you have to be very disciplined to leave stuff out, you know. You could go back into the book and make a Trainspotting 2, because there's enough material there to merit at least one other film. I think novelists' relationship with their novel is very complex. It's very lonely and long period of time. You hand it over to somebody who's developing it for a much more public experience. And writers often say it's very difficult to adapt their own novel, really. They're too close to it. They can't be cruel enough with it, because there's a lot of cruelty involved. You have to cut a lot of stuff. You have to simplify a lot of stuff. A novel is a reflective experience which you can control the pace of, whereas a film is a linear A to B, 90 minutes, you've no choice except to just walk out or not. You experience it at the pace that's dictated by the filmmakers, you know. Bum, diggy, 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 bong, diggy, bong. Funnily enough, when it goes back on DVD, it ends up like the novel. People watch it on their own, like they read a novel on their own. It kind of goes, the circle's complete, really. They come back to it like that. We deliberately made the film for a very small amount of money. I mean, it's a huge amount of money in people's lives. It's like £2 million, I think it was made for. We did that because we thought we want to make the film as graphically as possible. We wanted it to be quite an extreme experience. And of course, on the business side of it, that tells you that it'll have a limited audience, you know. And we thought a story of this gang of drug abusers in Edinburgh would, you know, the record of drug films is appalling in terms of people just don't go to see them. People go to the cinema for different reasons than that. And so we thought it would have a very limited appeal. And then we thought, oh no, it will get released because Shallow Grave was a hit, so there's bound to be some kind of release destined for it. You know, there's a lot of pyrotechnics in the film, acting-wise. There's some extraordinary sequences. Bobby Carlyle, you think of Bobby, and you think of, you know, Begbie and Spud, and there's some, you know, and Johnny doing his Sean Connery and all. This great kind of, those actors blazing away.
Do you see the beast? Have you got it in your sights?
Clear enough, Mitch Moneypenny. This should present no significant problems.
Your film won't work, really, unless you have an emotional through line on it. And that's Renton, I think. And I remember Ewan being very worried that he wasn't doing enough, because actors, obviously, they're acting with other people, and he thought he wasn't doing enough. But what was wonderful about his performance is that he held this line, this very still centre in the film, which allowed all the kind of stuff to go, all the fireworks to go on around him and make it very entertaining to watch and a real pleasure. People kind of go, oh, you discovered Ewan McGregor, you know, and which is not true. You know, Ewan was a working actor, and he really wanted that part. And he really transformed himself. And the big thing that he did, that I was just remembering, was he cut all his hair off. He went to that figure that became that kind of image that you know from the film and the poster and things like that. I think everybody who'd read Begbie in the book saw him as a big guy, you know, whereas Bobby is obviously not, he's not a big, huge bruiser guy. But he had it down. He knew that guy, and he knew how to play that guy. And so you don't really, I didn't direct Bobby in the film, you know. He kind of knew that guy, and you just try and capture what they can give you, you know, as best you can. Fuck! You know, they contain it, and then it just flares.
And after that, what again was mine?
Some people would think it's very rich for a film, you know, you should do less on film. I love actors doing a lot, you know, taking a risk with really blazing. You know, I think that's very exciting. Maybe that's because I started off in the theatre, you know, where that kind of thing is more conventional, you know, in a big theatre. And Bobby's got a lot of theatrical experience as well. And Spud as well, you know, Spud's performance is huge, really, in a way.
No, I'll wash them.
They're my sheets.
Hugely dynamic, you know. Love all that. Kelly MacDonald, I feel especially fond of her, because I don't know whether, if it hadn't happened, Trainspotting, I don't know whether Kelly would have ended up acting, but she's emerged as a wonderful actor. And I was in Los Angeles, and there was a huge poster for Gosford Park, and there was a list of names, Helen Mirren and all the people who were in it, and there was Kelly MacDonald, and I felt really funnily proud of her being there.
And I was thinking to myself, now this girl's special.
Thanks.
They've all done brilliantly, and I think they've all continued to do really interesting work. There's some of them, well, almost all of them have done big films, you know, commercial films, but they've all remained doing individual idiosyncratic projects, like Trainspotting, maybe not as with the impact that Trainspotting happened to end up having, but all, you know, they've chosen films that are an interesting mix. And to get together that bunch of actors, the Ewans and Bobby and Kevin and Johnny and Kelly, it's a fantastic stroke of luck, really, I think. There's a lot of luck involved in getting a good cast. You can almost get away with anything through humour. The more you can use it, the better, really. I think it's people's defences drop, you know? They're more open, really, in a way. You kind of loosen them up. They're suddenly much more open, you know? They're much more vulnerable, really, in a way, to other material coming in. And that's certainly one of the features of Trainspotting, is that you get these rafts of hugely kind of outrageous, humorous scenes.
Mr. Murphy, what exactly attracts you to the leisure industry?
And a word, pleasure. It's like my pleasure and other people's leisure.
And then you follow it with the death of a baby, you know, and sick boy's heartbreak at that moment, and that's a great kind of place to have people, I think. You know, it really makes you feel like you've been on a real journey, I think. There are some very gruesome scenes in the film, and obviously the toilet's very gruesome to watch, and people react to that. But that was great to film, because actually shit, which is the way you experience it as an audience, is actually chocolate sauce, you know, so it's actually very pleasant. It smells very pleasantly on the... So things like that. The most difficult thing to shoot is the baby on the ceiling, because I know a lot of people really didn't think it was a good idea, that, and I don't know why, I just was really determined to do that baby on the ceiling. And it didn't look great. It sort of looks very weird and strange, and I like that about it, you know. I think I'm a great believer in things. Sometimes you shouldn't perfect things, technically. You know, and now you could CGI that baby, and it would, you know, you could make it move across the ceiling very... But, you know, we did it in a really kind of... We did everything in the camera, you know. It was kind of, there's somebody on the roof kind of trying to get it along, and it wouldn't move along smoothly. And that was a nightmare trying to film that. And I remember I didn't fall out with the crew, but we had a very fractious last day, I think, doing that. But I'm very proud of that scene. And it's partly, I think, because I remember reading it in the book and being really... I thought that was essential, that scene, for Renton's mind, really, in a way. I think people who accuse it of glamorising the drug experience, if you like, forget stuff like Tommy, the way that Tommy dies, the kitten scene and stuff like that. But we tried to stylise even some of that so that it made people keep watching, really, rather than drive people away from the film. Drug movies are normally full of staring into the grave, really. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to actually try and make a film that actually showed the potential of these people, ironically. Even though, on the other hand, the film doesn't deny that there's a horrific downside.
There's final hits and final hits. What kind was this to be?
We've always tried to avoid being, you know, making judgmental, moralistic films. You know, this is not a kind of learning experience. This is a visceral experience, and people take from it different things, really. The drug problem continues. It doesn't solve drugs. You know, it doesn't, like, no film will solve, you know, people take drugs, and drugs are a problem in society for very, very complex reasons, really. And it wasn't our job to go into that, other than in the tiniest way. There's a consensus arrived at later on about whether a film is a success or not. And the consensus on Trainspotting is clearly, you know, very positive. But I remember at the time when it was released, it wasn't all that way at all. You know, there was a kind of moral tidal wave which threatened to kind of drown it, especially about the depiction, the way that the world that these guys lived in was depicted in a very, a lot of people said in a very glamorous way.
Oh, fuck off!
I remember there was this journalist, Muriel Gray, who wrote an article in The Standard, I remember, and she supported the film, and I remember thinking that, I don't know whether it is a turning point, but I remember thinking, thank God that she'd written that, because she really spoke for the film in the way that it was intended, rather than the way that up to then it looked like it might be received. Whether it's false or not, you've got to retain a modesty about, you know, the impact something has, you know, and it's clearly become more than the sum of its parts. People are attached to it in a way that is fantastic, really. You still get people coming up to you in the street who recognise you, or and they love the film. One of the best moments I remember is being in Glasgow after the film had been released, and this guy came piling down the street to me, like, and I thought he was going to attack me, but he just said he just wanted to say how much he enjoyed it, and that was it. And then he just turned around and ran back into the shop, and stuff like that is fantastic. The experience of the film is what they take it. People can take it as a glamorous experience of drugs. I don't think they do when you experience the whole film. You see a very complex picture of minds ravaged and addicted and dedicated to drugs, really. And also, you know, beyond that, because it's not just a drugs film. I think it's a film about, you know, a bunch of friends really growing apart.
Nice one, Franco! Get in my fucking way!
It was about the way men, especially, split from their bonded friends that you have at school or, you know, in your youth, your teens. Men are not very good at keeping those friendships, you know, they tend to fracture, and it was a story about that as well. We had a relationship with a company, sadly now, who are defunct, and they picked up Shallow Grave and they marketed Shallow Grave in a really amazingly proud way. They didn't try and sell it just as a British film, they sold it as a film to go and see in the multiplex on a Friday night. You know, they took absolute pride in saying this is as good as all those films that are out at the same time, you know, from Hollywood. And they did that with Shallow Grave and it worked, and they really went for it in Trainspotting, and they marketed it in a hugely inventive way, tremendously aggressive, slightly glamorous, but you know, that is the pact that advertising has with itself. You have to kind of appeal to people. You have to tempt people and get them into the cinema, really. But for a time, there was a sense in which you almost had the feeling of a studio promoting its own work within the country that the film came from, and promoting it in a way that said it's for everybody, this film. It's not for a niche group, it's not for the art market, it's not for a cult audience, it's for everybody who goes to the cinema, you know? And we've lost that now, sadly. It's been fractured, but for a time it was there and it was wonderful, I think. It changes you in the sense that there's a lot of expectations, you know, because people obviously cherish the film, you know, really love the film. And in one sense they always want every other film you make to be like Trainspotting, which I can understand because I'm the same about other filmmakers, you know. When you make a film like Trainspotting, which goes down very well and everybody kind of wants to be in something like that, star actors they'd like to be in Trainspotting. You get a lot of offers from Hollywood, but haven't really followed up any of that. People have remained captivated by the film, really, and by these actors and the way they portray those characters, you know, and really by something that Irving started off a long, long time ago on his own, you know, kind of typing away, you know, and it's amazing that what he wrote about then has really mesmerised people for a long time, really.